Wow, how's everybody? Good? We're going to continue in our series today called 50 Shades of They. And last week, if you weren't here, we talked about the wrong and right kind of theys that we have in our life. And anybody remember any of the theys? The cray they. Anybody recognize any of the cray theys in their life this week? Yeah. If you didn't recognize them, remember what I've told you. Yeah, it's you. Yeah. So you had the cray days, you had the fray days. Those are the days that just wear you into to just wear you down. And then there's the right kind of days and the days that we really need in our life, the way days, those that are seeking after the way, the truth, and the life. And so as we started kind of looking at this, we said that the world, have y'all noticed that the world's goal is to keep you in the fray? Like everything is about bringing everything to the fray. If you rise up, there's going to be 10 people there to drag you back down, right? Nobody wants you to succeed, let me tell you that. Nobody wants you to succeed. We're in a world today that everything is a push to the middle. And even if you got people that want to stand out, they're like, you see these gothic people or these people that say, no, I'm going against the flow, but what do they want to do? They want to gather themselves around people that are the same way, right? So they can be normal. We have this striving in our lives for normalcy. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but what it does for us is it keeps the world kind of in a very mediocre state. But that's not the life Jesus came to give. The life Jesus came to give, he said, I want to give you an abundant life, or one of the translations says a more better life, a life that's above, that's beyond what we now have. And I was telling you, man, I feel so strongly that we need leaders that are going to rise up out of the fray. We need people that are going to stand up and be different, people that are going to stand for something, that are going to rise up and say, I'm not going to settle for mediocrity. I'm not going to settle for living in the fray. I want to rise above it. I want to lead. And when we do that, man, people are going to try to pull us down and they're going to try to put us down. And so after the message last week, I was asked, how do you rise above it? Because I want that. And man, that's a good thing. We want that life, don't we? Do we want more? Do you want more out of life than just to get by, than just to survive, than just to live your life out? We want more than that, right? Like we strive for an abundant life. Jesus used the word a lot, an eternal life. That word eternal, it means like life on life on life. Perpetual life, like a life that is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's the kind of life I think we all want. That's the kind of life I think we're striving for. So today I want to talk about exactly how do I rise above the fray. Are y'all ready? All right. If you got a Bible, then I'm going to start out today in a pretty familiar place in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14. In 2 Corinthians, and in the letters to the Corinthians, there's this guy, Paul. And this guy, Paul, man, he was a leader. He was a guy who rose above the fray. He was living his life outside of the normal just get by life. He said at one place, among the Jews, I was a Jew among the Jews, a Pharisee. I was a Roman citizen. Like he was part of this culture, but also in a leading type role. And when he was transformed and resurrected and changed on this road where he was blinded, he became passionate about the way. And so he began to journey and lead out, and he started all of these groups of people who were rising out of the fray of their day, people who were coming out and sticking out and getting more of life, just grabbing hold of this abundant life Jesus talked about. And so he writes this letter back to them in the book of Corinthians, and in Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14, he's reminding them of things that he had taught them earlier. And he says this, and I'm in a King James Bible, amen? Let's go old school. Let's kick it old school. That's right. I can read it. Watch this. Verse 14. Be ye not unequally yoked together. He goes on, he says, be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. Because what could light and darkness have in common? What could Baal have in common with you who are transformed and changed and resurrected, you who live differently? What could you have in common with the rest of the world? Be ye not unequally yoked. And when we read that, how many of you guys heard that before? Good church people. How many of you guys have heard that about marriage? Yeah, that's our big marriage verse, right? That's what we tell our kids. Be ye not unequally yoked with unbelievers. And we talk about that. You know, when I was a kid, this is how jacked up don't say that. This is where our gospel message was a little slanted. We'll say it that way. Is that better? When I was a kid, they talked about this because they preached and taught against interracial marriage. Like, if you were a black or Hispanic or purple or pink or whatever, that you weren't to marry interracially because that would be unequally yoked. Like, it was a real, have you noticed how a lot of times we just take the Bible and kind of, just to get it right where we need it to be to suit us? Okay, but that's not what Paul's talking about. That's not what Paul's talking about at all. What Paul's talking about, and here's the other thing I want you to get. When he says don't be unequally yoked, he's not saying that you're good and everybody else is bad. I want you to get that, because that's not the context. Whatsoever, that's not the context. We try to define everything as good or bad. And this isn't good or bad, but extremely different. What can life and death have in common? We wouldn't say that, ooh, you're good if you're alive and you're bad if you're dead. There's a lot of good people who are dead, right? But live people and dead people are definitely different. I've noticed. I mean, I don't have a verse, but from my experience, I've noticed that. Where's Paul coming from? Well, he uses the word yoke. Now, anybody know what a yoke is? Anybody go old school know what a yoke is? Farmers. All right. A yoke is what you would do to put together animals so you could plow behind them, right? Because everybody knows that one animal plus one animal is greater than two animals, right? Increased horsepower. Mopar, supercharged, right? I knew that'd bring you out. Okay, we know that when you yoke two strong oxen, that the horsepower or ox power that they're going to produce is going to be a multiple, not an addition, right? And the truth is that this is the way it was supposed to work to make it easier on the animals. But Paul's referencing something here because Paul's a scholar. He goes deep, right? Paul knows his Hebrew writings. He knows his Hebrew teaching. So he's referencing a verse in Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy chapter 22, God has given his laws, and he's given a list of these laws. And they're laws that I read one guy on the internet, he was talking to his son about these laws, And he said, did God really have to give these Jews these laws? Because he said, I would imagine that the rest of primitive man was making fun of them if they didn't already know this stuff. Like God had to write this down for the Jews because they couldn't figure this out. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But God definitely puts it in his law in Deuteronomy chapter 22. And I want to look at verse 10. Now, if you look at verse 9, it says, thou shalt not sow thy vineyard with various seeds, lest the fruit of thy seed which thou hast sown and the fruit of thy vineyard be defiled. And what he means is that you don't mix the seeds or it messes up the grapes and it don't produce the wine. Like you'll get bitter grapes and you'll get unfruitful production. He says in the verse after it, he says, don't mix your cloth. When you're making your garments, don't mix your wools and your linens. I'll tell you why. Any women in here that sew? Any men that sew? Anybody that sews? Like when you mix unlike cloths, what happens when you wash it? Right? It's bad. You know how I know that? This shirt I have on. Hate this shirt. I hate this shirt. And you know why I wore this shirt today? So I could prove to you that God knows what he's talking about. The stitching on this shirt, this black stitching, is like yarn. And the shirt is like cloth or something. I don't know. It's cotton. I don't know. We'll just call it cloth. We'll call it linen. That's what God called it. Now, you know what happened when I washed this shirt? All of these black things shrink up. And my shirt looks like a little ball. And especially around my pockets. And it gives me boobs. I got a boob shirt. Just move on? Okay. My daughter says move on. So I have to iron and stretch and pull because God knows what he's talking about. But if I believe that God knows what he's talking about because of a shirt, then I want you to get this. In Deuteronomy chapter 22, in verse 10, it says this: thou shalt not plow with an ox and an ass together. Why? Because they're unequally yoked, right? When you put the big wooden yoke across an ox and an ass, what? You may have to leave. When you put a yoke, a big wooden yoke across an ox and a donkey, better, what happens? They don't have the same build. They don't have the same strength. They don't have the same stride. And so instead of 1 + 1 being greater than 2, 1 + 1 becomes less than 1. Now, I thought this was interesting, and so I started researching. I heard this thing, and I don't believe everything I hear, so I go and research. And I found out some fascinating things about the ox and the ass. The donkey. Sorry. I found there is a plant. Here's what donkey, they love to eat these plants, right? And so every chance the donkey eats a plant. And to the donkey, it's nourishment. It's like a weed. And so the donkey's eating this plant, and they love it, and they're just chomping, good. And what happens is it gets and becomes part of their digestive system, right? But this same plant that the donkey eats is poisonous to the ox. The ox would never eat this plant. Actually, an ox won't even eat around in the vicinity where this plant grows because it makes him desperately sick. And if eating enough of it or exposed to enough of it, it will kill the ox. And here's what happens if you yoke an ox and an ass together. The ox will actually turn his head and not breathe in the breath from the donkey. Because if he breathes in the breath of this donkey for too long, it will make him not only sick, but it'll kill him. And so what happens, and this is what this kid was talking about, everybody else in the world seemed to notice that the ox would then pull away from the ass. And the farmer could not plow straight lines because the ox wanted to pull in a circle. Interesting, huh? And Paul says that we should not be unequally yoked also. My question is, where do you want to be going? Where do we want to go? Do we want to remain in the fray or do we want to rise out of the fray? We want to rise out of the fray. But see, the problem for a lot of us is we are oxen yoked with asses. S-I? I don't know how to say that. And so what we do is we pull and we end up plowing circles, right? Best case scenario. Worst case scenario is we're breathing donkey breath until it kills us. Have you seen it? Have you lived it? See, we yoke ourselves with people, and I'm not saying bad people. I'm saying wrong people. We yoke ourselves with people who aren't similar. I mean, physically, you look at an ox and an ass, and they're not similar, right, at all. It's obvious to everyone that they're not similar. And we ought to be able to look around our lives and we ought to see that which of these is not the same. And when we see that, we ought to say, man, I probably shouldn't yoke up, tie myself to this ass. Right? But so many times, man, we lie to ourselves and go, no, man, they're an ox. They're an ox like me. Or else we say crazier things than that. Oh, I know they're an ass. I'm just going to make them an ox. Right? Have you heard that? They're an ass. I know. But I'm going to make them an ox. You can't make an ass an ox. Rule number 1, write it down. You can't do it. It's not possible. It's not possible. So when we start to look at how do I rise above the fray? How do I rise above? How do I get where I want to go? Well, we've got to start looking and saying, who is like me and who is going the direction I'm going? I want you to write this down. Number 1. How to rise above the fray. Yoke myself to people going the same direction. Yoke myself to people going the same direction. Amos 3:3 says, how can two people walk together if they don't decide a direction? How can two people walk together if they don't agree on the direction? Well, what will happen is if you yoke yourself with people who aren't going the same direction, I'm not saying good or bad. I'm saying people who don't want, there are people in your life who are great people, but they want to stay in the fray, and guess what? They want to keep you in the fray too. They like it because it's just the way it's always been, and it feels so good. So good. Yoke yourself with people going the same direction. Now, here's the thing. That's kind of a stupid thing to say, right? Because if you're yoked, you're either going nowhere or you're going the same direction, right? Here's number 2, though. Yoke yourself with people who are like you. Yoke yourself with people who are like you. Now, I know this makes sense, right? But if you're an ox, yoke up with an ox, and 1 and 1 becomes more than 2. If you're an ass, yoke up with an ass. If you're an ox, yoke up with an ox. Genesis, I think it's chapter 2, verse, I may have wrote it down. Or not, maybe I didn't. Genesis 2:18. Genesis 2:18, God has gone through creation, and in Genesis 2, he starts back talking about how man was created. And all through creation, remember, God was like, let there be light, and he saw the light, and it was good, right? Remember this? All through creation, and it was good. And God formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed life into his body. And he looked at him and he said, it is not good that man is alone. See, you were never created to plow alone. Because one ox pulling one plow is going to be hard. It's going to be a hard life. It is not good. It is not good for man to be alone. So you've got to find somebody who is like you. Somebody who has your passion, your drive, your desires. And you're like, where do I look? I did this experiment here in this church, man. I was doing a message and it was about needs and meeting needs. And I passed out cards to everybody in here. And some of you guys were here at that time. And I was like, write down the thing you need right now in your life. And I was thinking somebody's going to write down, like, I need a lawnmower, I need a weed eater, I need, I was like, because these are real needs. And then I told everybody, and flip it over and write down the thing you have to give. Y'all remember that? Anybody here when I did that? Because I was thinking, if people, I believe that God meets all the needs. I believe there's more than enough resources to meet everybody's needs. I just believe we have a resource issue. We have an exchange issue, right? You know what I got back on those cards? Number one thing, across the board, unanimous. What do I need? Relationships. Relationships. Not a mower, not a weed eater. Not a baby. Relationships. I flipped over the cards and was shocked. Unanimously, every card, what do you have to give? Relationship. I'm like, we've got all of these people sitting side by side, and every one of them need relationships. And they're sitting side by side, and every one of them have relationships to give. What's the problem? Man, there's a breakdown in our skills and our abilities to connect with other human beings. Where do I find people like me? Where do I find people going the same direction as me? Where do I find people that I need to yoke myself to? Well, I'd say church is a good place to start. That's what the church is. Do you realize the word church means the gathering? The gathering of the people who have the same beliefs and the same passions and the same desires. People who are going the same direction. Now, I'm going to meddle. I'm just going to jump in your business big time. There's been a lot of people leave our church. If you're yoked with people who have left, you're not plowing together. You're either going to start plowing circles or you're going to get some donkey breath and die. Hey, it's funny, but I've seen it happen. Over and over and over, I've seen it happen. When you quit plowing the same direction, take the yoke off and look for another ox. That's number 3. Number 3, cut them loose. Cut the poisonous theys in your life loose. That seems rude, doesn't it? Maybe it's rude because we don't know exactly what that means and what it looks like and how to do it. I was transformed and changed, and I was lived like an ass. Some people might even say I was one. I was a donkey, man. I ate poisonous weeds and breathed on oxen. But what happened, I got transformed, and all the people that I was yoked up with, I was caught in between these two worlds. Has anybody ever been there? Like, you're caught in between these two worlds? And here's the problem, like, I thought, well, I didn't think. All the Christians I knew were nerds. Like, the way it was, man. And that was cool. My daughter, you don't even move. Just. I was caught in between two worlds. I love my friends with all my heart, man. These are people that lay down their life for you, man. If somebody hurt you, they would stomp them out. You know, those were, I mean, we were friends, that kind of friends. But then they were this old me, and this new me couldn't yoke up with this old me because I realized that the breath coming off of these asses was poison. Right? I mean, anybody been there? And so what I did is I started realizing I needed something different. I didn't go, don't listen to me, don't go call your friends up today and say, you're an ass, I can't hang out with you anymore. Like, that's not going to be cool. Right? They don't understand. But when they ask you to go out and you say, well, really, man, I got this church thing I'm doing, it won't be long before they unyoke with you. That's what I found. Anybody found that to be true? They kind of are like, let me, excuse me, I'll step over here. Like, it's very uncomfortable, right? It's very uncomfortable. I love them. They're my friends. You're my fellowship. We're going to talk about that later. They're still our friends. We still know them. But man, they're just going a different direction. Their passions and drives and interests and goals and point of their life is not the same as mine. And I was a bummer to their life, and they was a They were a bummer to my life. And so there is a way to part that's not destructive. And I'll guarantee you that these friends of mine today, to this day, man, if they were looking to change their life, they would know that I would be there for them. Every time I see them, man, it's like we hadn't missed a beat. I love talking to them. I'm interested in what they're doing in their lives. But we're just going different directions. You got to break the chains with the old life if you want to rise above the fray. This has just been this vision that's been given to me, this impression is that I see this balloon, like this big balloon. And it's got all these tie downs and all these anchors, right? You want to know how to rise above the fray? You probably can't just go and do it. Let me tell you how it happens, though. When we begin to cut ties with this thing that's killing me, and this thing that's holding me back, and this thing, this relationship, this addiction, this habit, this unforgiveness, this hurt, this way of being, this stronghold that I have in my life. And one by one, as we cut those things, the balloon rises a little, rises a little, rises a little, rises a little. You don't have to do anything to rise above the fray except cut the things that are keeping you in it. Your natural state is above the fray. You were created for more than this. You were created to rise out of the fray. You were never created to live like everybody else. You were never placed here to be like everybody else. Jesus wants more life for you. And what we got to do is find those things that are killing me. Who's that person in your life that keeps putting you down? Cut them loose. Love them. Be friends with them. But do not fellowship with them. Don't listen to what they're saying. Don't take their input. They don't even know the life you're living or going for. They're so different. They talk donkey talk, and you talk ox talk. How can a donkey tell an ox what's best for an ox? Surround yourself with the right people. I want you to leave with this today. If we will look and see what it is and who it is that is keeping me in the fray and keeping me tore up and keeping me bound up and preventing me from having that kind of life, and we start to move on, you're going to naturally start to rise out of the fray. You're going to start to naturally rise up. Next time we talk, I'm going to tell you about making disciples. Because I think we need to yoke up with people who can walk with us to where we want to be. We keep setting our idols and our goals in people who are behind where we're going or who are in the fray. I don't want to follow somebody who's in the fray. I want to rise up. I'm looking for people to speak into my life, to teach me, to lead me, to guide me, who are going to walk me out of the fray. Okay? So what we want to concentrate on today and this week, though, is cutting loose the bonds, the yokes, the ties to those things that are keeping me from becoming naturally free. Okay? And once we start to work on that, then we'll talk later about how to connect with someone who can walk with you to where you want to go. All right? Is that good? Let me pray for you.
Till the night I met that girl.